On December 26, 1991, 22-year-old Cindy L. Pavey, a mother of two, was found dead in her home in the small town of Murphysboro. It was a brutal murder. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious suspects. The children were nearby, but too young to understand anything. The investigation stalled. The case was closed, and it wasn't until 17 years later that the truth came to light. How could the killer hide for so long? Why did the evidence only surface after a decade and a half? And who was really around that night? The quiet, small town of Murphysboro in southern Illinois is perfect for people who value the simple life. Located far from big cities like St. Louis and Memphis, it's ideal for a quiet family life. It was here, to this cozy corner, that 22-year-old Cindy Pavey and her husband Corey decided to move to start a family. But their choice was no accident. Cindy wanted to be closer to her sister, Ginger Duty, with whom she was very close. She gratefully accepted Ginger's help in raising her children, Tina and Missy. The girls were born with special needs. Tina was deaf, and Missy had developmental delays. But that was precisely why Cindy loved her children all the more. She was a wonderful mother and devoted to her daughters wholeheartedly. Although they required special care, the girls flourished under their mother's tireless nurturing. However, Cindy's marriage began to crumble. She and her husband were having problems. The young woman said they often argued. After 4 years of a strained relationship, Cindy took the children and left her husband. She moved with the girls into a house on Shoemaker Drive, 2 blocks from her sister's apartment, and began a new life there. The young single mother's life changed, and soon she met a man named Tyler Green. Her suitor's dubious past didn't stop her from considering him a good partner. Cindy dreamed of someone who would love and care for her. As the winter holidays approached, Cindy felt happy again. But a few weeks before Christmas, it became clear that Cindy's dreams would not come true. On the morning of December 26, 1991, the police received an alarming call from Cindy's neighbor, Brianna Collins. Brianna reported that something terrible was happening in her best friend's bedroom. She had come to check on Cindy and upon entering the house, found her lying dead on the floor. She then called the police. Officer Jim Butler rushed to the scene. When he arrived at Cindy's home, paramedics were already on site. They let him into the house, and he was met with an incredible sight. Cindy's daughters seemed to have no idea that something bad had happened to their mother. The children were sitting carefree on the couch, eating porridge and watching cartoons. While the girls were busy, Brianna told Butler what had happened that morning. Apparently, Brianna often helped Cindy take the girls to school. The children hadn't arrived at the bus stop on time, and she decided to see what was going on. When no one answered the door, Brianna went inside. She told Butler that the door wasn't locked. To her surprise, the girls were watching television alone. Brianna went into the bedroom, where a horrific sight awaited her. Cindy's face was covered in blood from her forehead to her chin. She was wearing a shirt, but nothing below the waist. She was lying on her back in a pool of blood about 40 centimeters deep. Cindy had been brutally beaten and apparently raped. Officer Jim Butler had never seen anything like it. It was a gruesome sight. So gruesome that Butler suspected whoever killed Cindy had reasons for wanting her dead. But what? He looked around but could see no signs of a break-in or robbery. If it wasn't about money, why was Cindy murdered so brutally? To find out, Officer Butler contacted the homicide unit. The case was assigned to Tim Ledger. The investigation was assigned to a dedicated sergeant with 20 years of experience with the Murphysboro Police Department. After examining Cindy Pavey's injuries, Ledger saw the harsh reality. Cindy had been brutally beaten. Her face and neck were covered in blood, and she had received several hard blows to the head. Among the other injuries was what appeared to be a bloody gunshot wound. That's how brutal the killer was. He kicked Cindy. Presumably, the killer kicked her and even stomped on her head. Everything indicated that the attacker wasn't just angry. He was furious if he had decided to do something like that. Clearly, someone was very angry with Cindy. But who and why? Hoping that DNA testing would provide answers to these questions, the detectives sent Cindy's clothing to the lab. Meanwhile, Detective Ledger searched the area around the house for clues. He examined the entire area but found nothing suspicious. When a violent crime is involved and there are no signs of a break-in, close relatives or friends are the first suspects. They can most easily gain entry to the home and are usually capable of becoming so enraged that they can cause serious injuries like Cindy's. Investigators decided to question the person who knew Cindy best, her ex-husband Corey. At the same time, the autopsy results came in, and the police had new leads. Based on the condition of the body, the coroner concluded that death had occurred around midnight and that the perpetrator had left his DNA behind. Traces of sperm were found both inside and outside Cindy's body. Forensic scientists also examined the blood-stained shirt found beneath her body. Investigators tried to find the owner of this DNA, and the first person they turned to was Cindy's ex-husband Corey. He was the prime suspect. When the question arose as to who could do such a thing, everyone assumed the husband had something to do with the murder, because they often argued. It was obvious that the marriage was not going well. The police often came to mediate the marital disputes. Although the couple had not been in contact for a year, their strained relationship had reached a critical point a few days before Cindy's death. The divorce papers had to be signed, and Cindy met with her husband a day or two before her death to discuss the reasons for the dissolution of the marriage. It is possible that Corey, upon learning that separation was inevitable, became very angry with Cindy and decided to deny her a divorce at all costs. At this time, the police received a call that could help the investigator. A man reported picking up a hitchhiker near Cindy's house on the night of the murder. The description of the hitchhiker matched the prime suspect, Cindy's husband. Investigators were told about a white man with light blonde hair. The most important clue was that the passenger was wearing hiking boots. Since a shoe print had been found on Cindy's body, investigators decided to verify this information and invited the witness to the station. Based on his description, Corey fit the suspect profile perfectly. According to the witness, the passenger was visibly nervous and sweating, even though it was December. Who was this passenger, really? Cindy's husband or a fabrication of the driver, who had heard about the murder on the news? There was only one way to find out. Investigators questioned Cindy's ex-husband to find out what he had been doing that evening. He had no alibi, and his inability to give his exact whereabouts increased the police's suspicions. Investigators still needed to determine whether he had stopped on the side of the road. They asked the witness to identify the suspect. However, the witness could not identify Cindy's ex-husband as the passenger. This suggested that Corey had nothing to do with the crime. When the shoe size didn't match the print on Cindy's body, the investigators were finally convinced that it wasn't him. There was no longer any reason to detain him. The next suspect on the list was Cindy's boyfriend, Tyler Green. He had already had trouble with the law. He was charged with resisting arrest, domestic violence, substance abuse, and intoxication. Cindy and Tyler Green had been together for 9 months, and he sometimes stayed overnight with her. As investigators discovered, Cindy and Tyler also had a strained relationship. Many said he hit her in front of other people. It's possible he had gone to Cindy's house the night of the murder and abused her hospitality. To better understand the suspect's character, investigators turned to Cindy's sister, Ginger, whom Tyler described as a bully. Now investigators had compelling reason to summon Cindy's boyfriend to the station. To find out if this man had anything to do with her death, they had to examine the reasons for their conflicts. However, Tyler Green decided to go to the police himself to discuss his relationship with Cindy. When he arrived at the station, he was very upset. Investigators suspected he was feigning unhappiness to throw them off the scent. Suspects in crimes of passion often behave this way. They even assist the investigation to prove they had absolutely nothing to do with it. Tyler failed to convince the police of his innocence. On the contrary, according to his statements, Everyone was convinced he had killed Cindy. The man significantly downplayed his role in the family dispute, so the police wouldn't think he was capable of harming or even killing Cindy. Tyler explained that he and Cindy still loved each other. He then admitted to having slept with Cindy a few days before the murder, which further increased suspicion. Given that Cindy had been raped, Tyler may have been trying to cover himself in case his DNA matched the DNA the experts had found in her body. He may have been working on his alibi. He claimed to have been with Cindy on the day of the murder, but left shortly before the crime. He said his brother picked him up from Cindy's, and they drove together to Frankfurt, where he was attending a relative's birthday party. Tyler said he wasn't in the mood to celebrate. Out of jealousy, he called Cindy several times to check if she was home, but she didn't answer her phone. He was very jealous and didn't allow her to have close contact with other people. Cindy didn't answer her phone, and Tyler concluded that she had spent the night with another man. These calls from his brother's house seemed to give Tyler an alibi. He could have left the party, driven 50 kilometers, killed Cindy, and returned to call her. His brother swore that Tyler had been at the party all night, but whether that was true or not would be revealed by checking Tyler's phone. The recordings of the calls from that time proved that he was telling the truth. But even if the calls confirmed Tyler's alibi, one detail still tormented the police: the bloody shoe print found on Cindy's body. The most important thing now was to compare this print to Tyler's shoes. If the prints matched, his alibi would be invalidated. DNA, fiber, and blood cannot be replicated. The police obtained a search warrant for Tyler's shoes, but the forensic examination revealed that he had a different shoe size. Cindy's boyfriend was not involved in her brutal murder. Although Tyler was innocent, the police decided to keep him under surveillance until the results of the investigation were in. If his DNA was found at the crime scene, he could be the murderer. Some of Tyler's friends also had bad reputations, and perhaps one of them could help solve the case. During the interviews with local residents, another name came up: Arthur Hudson. When it came to alcohol and violence, Arthur was similar to Cindy's boyfriend. Friends remembered that the two often visited her. Arthur Hudson, along with Cindy's boyfriend, had been watching her, which is why everyone thought it was a contract killing. But was Tyler really so jealous that he would have hired a hitman? And was Arthur really the right person for the role? Cindy knew Arthur well. He often spent time with her friends. If he had come to her house, she would have let him in. Perhaps that was exactly what happened the night Cindy was killed. Arthur had been to Cindy's the day before the murder, so he absolutely had to be questioned. He was summoned to the police station for questioning. He confirmed that he had supposedly visited Cindy the day before her murder and vehemently protested that he had not killed her. He said he had spent the evening with friends, and his alibi was confirmed. There was no evidence against him, and the police had to release him. During the course of the investigation, a DNA sample was also taken from Arthur for comparison. Verifying the match took some time. The investigators were empty-handed, but they refused to give up. Tim Ledger worked tirelessly on the case and seemed to have found the killer. It could be a high school boy, Drake Reynolds. He was in love with Cindy and downright obsessed with her. Although Drake and Cindy had only met a few times in the past, he was constantly around her. Investigators suspected that Drake was angry because she didn't return his feelings. Drake's words, "She'll be mine and she'll come back to me," aroused their suspicions. His friends also reported that Drake had been behaving strangely shortly before Cindy's murder. At the same time, a friend of the young woman told investigators that someone had been following Cindy. He had opened the windows and cut the screen door. She feared it was Drake, but Cindy didn't file a police report. However, when investigating Tyler's involvement in the damage, the police found no evidence of Tyler's involvement. Cindy's house was fine. The windows, frames, and the grill on the door were unbroken. According to Cindy's friends, Drake had been around her all these years, and no one was surprised when he showed up at her home shortly before her murder. Friends were gathering at Cindy's house for a party. Perhaps this visit was part of a criminal plan. Perhaps Drake, intent on harming Cindy, had searched the house to plan his best way in the next day. Investigators didn't know whether he was the murderer and had to find out as the investigation progressed. At the station, Drake swore that he hadn't killed Cindy or engaged in any intimate activity with her. He even provided a DNA sample. But while investigators waited for the results of the investigation, he ended up on the list of suspects. Along with Drake, Arthur Hudson, who was helping Cindy's boyfriend watch her, was also on the list. Both were seen with Cindy a few hours before her death, but the investigator remained Tyler Green, the prime suspect. Attention was primarily focused on her boyfriend. The investigators were convinced he was the murderer, but until the DNA test results were available, Tyler was considered innocent. Unfortunately, the investigation into Cindy's murder was closed due to a lack of new information. It seemed as if the investigators had reached a dead end. There were no new information or leads. Thus, a few months after Cindy's murder, the case was filed under unsolved cases. The police were left with no choice but to test their old theories. They suspected that Cindy had been the random victim of a passing criminal. It happens that serial killers or vagrants attack people they don't know in quiet neighborhoods and then move on. Months and then years passed, but Officer Tim Ledger didn't give up hope. He couldn't shake the thought that Cindy's family deserved justice. He suspected that new DNA testing techniques could provide answers to his questions. At the investigators' initiative, Cindy's case was reopened, and the evidence was sent to a lab for DNA identification. The investigators were particularly interested in one thing: Cindy's nightgown, which contained sperm and blood. At that time, it was not yet technically possible to link DNA samples to a specific person. At that time, only the sperm samples were taken for analysis. The nightgown was not tested for DNA because, in 1991, it was not yet possible to obtain irrefutable evidence using DNA. So, 17 years after the murder, detectives tried to use modern technology to solve the old case and finally put Cindy's murderer behind bars. Perhaps this was the breakthrough the investigators and Cindy's sister had been waiting for. They enlisted the help of another crime fighter, District Attorney Mike Wepseek. To be on the safe side, they developed a plan together, aiming to make the evidence of guilt as convincing as possible. 27 years of experience and practice told the prosecutor who might have committed the murder. Like the investigators, he suspected Cindy's boyfriend, Tyler Green. When the lab tested 2 DNA samples from the crime scene, investigators expected the name of their prime suspect to emerge. The first sample was sperm taken from Cindy's body. It was no surprise that this sperm came from Tyler. During interrogation, he had admitted to having sex with her a few days before her death. But in addition to the DNA in Cindy's body, sperm mixed with blood was also found on her nightgown. It was obvious that Tyler had covered his tracks. But things aren't always as simple as they seem. The results came in on the anniversary of Cindy's murder, and investigators were shocked. The second sample of semen belonged to Quincy Hughes. Oddly enough, this regular at police stations perfectly fit the profile of Cindy's killer. He had multiple convictions for rape, robbery, and burglary. He was capable of such a crime. He followed women to their homes and broke in. Even more suspicious was Quincy's address. The house he was living in at the time of Cindy's murder was only a block and a half from her home. Yet, no one mentioned Quincy when the police questioned neighbors throughout the investigation. There was no connection between Quincy Hughes and Cindy Pavey. None of her relatives remembered him, nor did her friends and neighbors. It seemed as if the 21-year-old man, who lived with his mother, attracted no attention. But the police discovered that he and Cindy had occasionally crossed paths as neighbors. It wasn't surprising that Quincy Hughes was serving time in a Jackson County jail for robbery. That's where the investigators visited him. During the conversation, they asked him if he knew Cindy Pavey. They showed him a photo of her, but he claimed not to know her. However, during the next interrogation, the inmate changed his story. He admitted that he knew her from school and had seen her in the neighborhood. The investigators pressed him, and Quincy admitted that he knew Cindy more than just casually. Finally, he confessed to having met her. How many times did you sleep with her? 3 or 4 times? What nonsense. Perhaps one of the meetings took place the night of Cindy's murder. The investigators persisted, and with each subsequent question, Quincy dug himself deeper into his own grave. We have a dead woman. Yes, DNA was found on her body. Is that her DNA? Yes, I slept with her. According to the evidence, they were in her apartment. I don't know what to say, guys. I'm telling the truth. I wasn't with her, got it? I wasn't there. With his contradictory statements, Quincy maneuvered himself into a trap. He denied having been with her, which was untrue, as his DNA had been found on Cindy Pavey's body, which linked him to the murder. A DNA sample is a very convincing piece of evidence, but investigators needed irrefutable proof to convict Hughes of the murder. The prosecutor dug a little deeper and found what he was looking for. Quincy Hughes had called his relatives several times, and in a conversation with his brother, he indirectly confessed to the murder of Cindy Pavey. In prison, all phone conversations are recorded. On the phone, he said, "Brother, they caught me after all." The investigators themselves couldn't have said it better. Finally, in February 2008, after a 17-year investigation, Quincy Hughes was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Cindy Lou Pavey. Quincy's arrest was a comfort to many, but Cindy's sister, Ginger, couldn't get over the shock because the murderer was their neighbor. Quincy Hughes maintains his innocence to this day, but was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Everyone was happy that the murderer was behind bars and Cindy's family had received justice. When life in Murphysboro returned to normal, one question remained unanswered. What had happened that fateful night? Probably only Quincy and Cindy knew, but based on the evidence, the following can probably be reconstructed. Around midnight, Quincy Hughes was out looking for adventure. Cindy didn't wait for him when he broke into the house. According to one version of events, Cindy Pavey had forgotten to lock the door that evening, and Quincy Hughes broke into the house. Once inside, he pounced on Cindy and raped her. There were signs of a struggle in the bedroom. Cindy apparently fought back against her attacker, but the perpetrator overpowered her. He was certainly capable of committing such a crime. Quincy Hughes raped Cindy and crushed her skull with his shoe, while her daughters slept in their beds. They never knew that their mother straightened their covers that night for the last time. Cindy's family finally received justice, something they had been denied for 17 years. But that won't heal their wounds. Now Quincy Hughes is behind bars, but he has a life. He's alive, he's breathing. He has what he took from Cindy Pavey. Thanks for watching and take care.